Welcome to part 2 of Dispelling the Immigration Myth. This is Power of Attorney podcast. I'm your host, LeTonya Moore, and we are going to pick right up with immigration attorney Dhenu Maru as we talk about the business side of immigration. But just in the interest of time, I do want us to shift a bit and talk about the business immigration, because one of the concerns that I hear, especially from our business clients, is sometimes they want to be able to just hire whoever they want from wherever, because of course we're living in a digital world. And some of them, I have a client right now, as we talked about, I have a client right now that does recruiting in the technology space, and he gets lots of what he would call the perfect candidate for his client, but they may be in other areas, or they may be here, but they may be on a work visa that was sponsored by a different company. So there's so many different aspects of it. I know that you help business owners who are seeking to do that. They're seeking to hire. They have this candidate. They've already vetted it. So she is not connecting you with candidates, but when you find that ideal candidate that you would like to bring in, this is what Dhenu does. Tell us a little bit about that process and how that works.
Sure. Actually, this is a really interesting timing for this conversation, because this is what I call the H-1B season. And the reason that there's a season for something like this is because H-1B applications are also based on quotas. Now, H-1B means employer-employee visa. It is a temporary visa. It's not a green card, and it's issued for a maximum of 6 years. Now, within that 6-year time frame, the employer has a decision to make about whether or not to sponsor this employee for a more permanent green card. But initially, it is issued for 6 years as a maximum. And so what happens is that an employer, say, identifies a potential employee. Maybe the person's here as a international student, say, and they need sponsorship. And so when somebody needs sponsorship, the employer has to file an application for an H-1B visa, and it has to be done in this time frame, because what happens is there is a quota of 65,000 applications for bachelor's degree holders or higher in a specific occupation, as the job has to require that same occupation as well. And then there are additional 20,000 for master's degree holders. And so the way it works is that, say, you've identified somebody, but you're competing for these spots. And the lottery period opens this year, March 1st, goes through March 20th. And then the reason that there's a lottery is because, there's an expectation that these numbers will fill up rather quickly. And then because they will fill up rather quickly, there will be more applications than there are numbers available. And every year the people who get in, it is decided by a lottery. Now, this year they're doing something a little bit different than they have in the past. And what they're doing is they're running the lottery before you file the complete application for an H-1B visa. In some ways, that's great news for employers, because you get to know whether or not your employee would be chosen in the lottery before you go through the trouble of having to file the entire application for your candidate. It's a very complex process, but a good, experienced immigration attorney can definitely help you through it, and it's definitely doable. So as long as somebody hasn't been out of status, past the age of 18 at all, as long as they are maintaining their visas, and they have a bachelor's degree in the field in which the employer wishes to hire, or the equivalent of one, then this is a process that the employer can use to apply for their H-1B visa. Now, there are also some countries that have other options, and one of them is our friend Canada. Canada and Canadians have the option of doing a TN visa, which is a treaty national visa, which is available for Canadians and Mexicans. And it is it is a 3-year renewable visa, but it is indefinitely renewable. So there is no lottery for it. That's the beautiful part about the TN visa. But the TN visa does not lead to a green card very naturally, because it is not a visa that allows for dual intent. It is a visa that requires the person to have the intent of returning to their country. So unlike the H-1B, the H-1B, you're allowed to have the intent of eventually wanting to move to the U.S. So those are some considerations that employers have to make when deciding which visa to use for their Canadian employees. And it's definitely worth a conversation with an attorney before making that hire, before making that decision about a potential candidate.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for fully explaining that, because I think that certainly those of us that don't work in this space, but would like the opportunity to recruit candidates across the border, this is very important, because I know several people that they utilize VAs that are in other countries. They don't have to go through this because they're contracting the services through an agency. But I say all that to say, but they're very satisfied with the quality of the work that they're getting. And so I know that some of them would love to know this information, because they may want to recruit an employee that may be seeking to come here.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And this is an option that is available for people, and it's doable, it's accessible, but you have to have the right guidance with it.
Absolutely. So what that means, listeners, is this is not something that you need to try to go at alone. You need to make sure that you reach out to Dhenu so that she can assist you. We're going to make sure that we share her contact information actually at the close of the podcast. I want to shift just one more time, because we have to. Why I have you here? We have to talk about these common myths about immigration law and about immigrants in general, because I can remember, I mean, the immigrants taking our jobs and all of these really polarizing statements. In my opinion, they're polarizing statements. Although they're polarizing, it's not something that's new, right? And we know we can talk about the politics behind it, but we won't. What I really want to focus on is I want you to talk with us about those myths, and really give our audience a true depiction or response to that particular, to all these common myths. What are some common myths? And tell us, and just talk a little bit more about each one based on your experience.
Sure. I mean, I think one common myth I've heard is that, immigrants don't pay taxes. Not true. There is, every year I see news articles that say, unclaimed taxes. Well, who's not claiming them? It's the people who are undocumented, right? People who are undocumented are paying into the system, but they are not able to claim those returns. And so a lot of money is being left on the table. It's actually the opposite, right? There's a lot of tax money that's being paid into the system by people who may be undocumented, but it is not being taken out. And so it's not entirely true that immigrants don't pay taxes. There are some people who work under the table, but by and large, people actually don't work under the table. So that's interesting to know. Another common myth that I hear is about immigrants taking our jobs. And it's surprising, because we see the other side of the equation, where employers are saying, I'm not finding a candidate that doesn't require sponsorship. I've advertised this position for 4 years, and we're not finding anyone who meets the qualifications. And so what we have to realize is that as a country, we are competing in the global marketplace at this point. We are no longer acting in isolation. We can't afford to. And so as a country, it is to our advantage to do two things: to be highly competitive in the global marketplace and to literally get the best possible talent there is in the world. And also, sometimes people don't realize that these visas save jobs. Why? Because if you can bring, the few technical workers that you need to save a department, that's better than offshoring the department. And so it's a very layered conversation, and it's a multi-layered conversation. It's not as simple as immigrants taking a job. There's also the piece where immigrants create jobs. Immigrants own businesses. Immigrants, own small businesses. Small businesses are very commonly owned by immigrants. And so, there's that piece as well. So the conversation is far more complex than soundbite can do justice,
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that, this is an election year. So there's no telling what we are going to hear with regard to that. So I wanted to make sure to give some time and space with the time that we had together to talk about that. And thank you so much for sharing. Before we go, what is one piece of advice that you would give to our listeners about the immigration field, period?
It is a field that touches every other field, whether it's, a field of law, whether it's a field of business. And so the interesting thing about immigration is that if you're working with an immigration, now I know, maybe some of your listeners are lawyers. So if they're working with an immigrant and in a different context, like maybe they're a criminal defense lawyer and they've got an immigrant who's charged with, committing a crime. Well, they have to make sure to contact an immigration lawyer in those cases, because immigration is one of those things that if you're not a citizen, it touches in a lot of different areas. Divorce, if one of the two people is a citizen, one of the two people is not a citizen, well, the immigration consequences of that are also something that need to be examined, in child custody cases. So there's in most areas of law, if somebody is an immigrant, I think that it's worth examining the immigration consequences of any action taken, because it touches on a lot of different areas.
Awesome. And thank you so much. How can our listeners with questions, or maybe they have their own immigration matter, how can they contact you?
Yeah, feel free to contact us by phone, by email, visit our website. Our phone number is 312-854-7065. We're located in Chicago, Illinois, but we're able to serve people from anywhere in the country. It's a federal practice area, and so we're designed to serve people from anywhere in the country. And our website is www.swagatusa.com. Swaga USA is the name of the firm. I'm happy to reach out to anyone who contacts us. Listeners, thank you for listening. And feel free to reach us if you have any immigration questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So guys, this has been your quick study of immigration law. And again, I encourage you guys to please reach out to Dhenu if you have any level of an immigration challenge, an immigration situation, because you want to make sure that you have an attorney involved very early in the process so that you can protect your rights. And so once again, this is Power of Attorney. I am your host, LeTonya Moore, encouraging you to leverage your property and protect your brand.